Um, the documentary there, although good, I thought that they actually did not capture a lot of the outfits and whatnot. But this is over at Mystic Lake. People have been to the casino at Mystic Lake, maybe? Well, it's
I've been around there, that area.
around there. Well, they have this annual powwow, and it's open to the public, and there's free food and stuff. In no small part because areas where there's casinos have a little bit more money for that kind of thing these days than they did even just a decade plus ago. But there's also a lot of Native American food that is there. It's really kind of interesting. A lot of kind of fried breads, lots of different ingredients. It's just showing you how colorful the different outfits are. And it goes all weekend and includes they do a procession in a big circle. All right, speaking of big circles, chapter 5 talks a lot about how land is divided up. And well, when the land was divided up in Minnesota, you probably know that the earth is divided up in lines of longitude and latitude. I don't know that. You've probably seen some of these lines on a globe and whatnot, or maybe some maps. But in a nutshell, the way we divide up the Earth's surface is useful for a number of different ways. Things like time zones, obviously. So if you divide the Earth in further and further and further smaller segments using those same lines as your base points, that is how property is divided up in the United States to be well sold off and to make a fair amount of money. The book talks about, it might get confusing because they'll use the term township, and sometimes people will picture like a small town, but a township is a unit of measure. It's a unit of measure of an area 6 miles by 6 miles. That's technically what a township is, whether or not it's been declared to be a town or not. That's how that categorizing of things works. And if you're ever flying over, obviously you could kind of see these divisions a bit more easily. Not many places around the earth were divided so concisely, but it was a big way to make money at the time. So what we now call Minnesota was actually brought into the United States in 3 different big stages. Ceded by Britain. This is after actually a number of military victories by the U.S. over Britain that they ceded this to us. Also, well, you've probably heard of the Louisiana Purchase, things like that. That again was areas that technically the French had. So basically, three different sections all kind of came together to be what was defined as the U.S. Let's see, I already talked about the 6 mile township thing. There was arguments at the time about where to specifically create the bottom of Minnesota. If it was going to be, for a time, would have been 2 states, more similar to like the Dakotas, north and the south Minnesota, if you could imagine such a thing. Not what happened in the end. So let's see, there's lots of different ways that this land was conveyed to people. The book talks about lots of different basically scams and different ways that people were able to get land. So one was that veterans could get warrants for land as payment in different military campaigns, specifically war in Mexico. Actually, a lot of people who fought in that war got land claims that were up here, and often what would happen is sometimes they would never come up here. They would just sell this off to speculators. Very often the local governments didn't really want speculators holding on to land Because what they would do is, they would have the rights to a certain amount of land, and they would often then just sit on it, right? Because they'd want the price to go up, and then they would just sell it. Where the state really wanted people producing stuff from the land, right? They wanted to maximize that tax base, maximize productivity. And so although land speculation was a big part of how land did eventually get through to people, often the speculator would go off to an area of land that they bought very cheaply and kind of check it out for minerals for a while, and if they couldn't find anything pretty quickly, they would then just sell it. They would hope that they could convince some new immigrants who probably might not have known better that it was perfectly good land for growing things on and whatnot. Very often what would happen in that case, you'd have a new immigrant coming from, I don't know, Scandinavia or somewhere, and they would spend their life savings on a lot of land that they were told was productive farmland, and all the news stories coming out of Minnesota was talking about how great the soil was, but then they would be unable to produce. So they would basically, lose their money, and the land, they would try to resell it, but no one would really want it because it had proven itself to be not productive. So these areas would just fall into disuse, and sometimes neighboring farmers or whatnot would just use that land as grazing land or whatever they wanted. Lots of those areas became reforested. And large land grants were given to lots of different places. So for example, like the University of Minnesota is a land grant institution because it was a bunch of land that was given to the school. The railroads got a lot of land, and that was a big way railroads made a lot of money because they would be given like a big wide area of land that maybe this much would be used for the actual tracks, but they'd be given this so that you could have like a station or something, or an area to repair things, different things like that. But they would be given all this land, and once the tracks were in there, or even just the tracks started to be built, all this land would just shoot up in value. And then the railroads, who were given this land for free, would then, sell it up and make giant amounts of money. And the government was okay with this because it considered the railroads a kind of public good. And the railroads themselves, they're able to keep their prices for conveying people and things low because they're making so much money on all the land. So for a good amount of time, that kind of subsidized their costs. Couple different acts that happened that were made to try to increase people using land as opposed to speculators. Some of these, especially the 1862, the Homestead Act, that made it so that if you agreed to farm an area for 5 years, that could become your property. There was also something, in the video, and elsewhere, talking about how Minnesotans fought in the Civil War. Population in Minnesota was, in general, against slavery, but actually our small farmers were especially against it because that was competition for agricultural goods, and it's tough to compete if someone is using slave labor and competing selling our agricultural goods. Let's see. Well, I already mentioned about how a bunch of land was often abandoned if it was not very useful. Like I said, you'd have people around them who would kind of use that land as a commons. There's lots of graft, meaning there's actually lots of fake land deeds that people would have, and then there'd be, you'd have to spend money on the legal system to try to prove if land was yours or not, and a lot of people didn't have money to do that kind of thing, so they might buy land and be unable to prove that it was theirs. Often they'd be sold a fake document and they didn't really own that land. Sometimes they did, but the person with the fake documents had better lawyers and more money to fight. So there's just all these different kinds of things that happened. And through time, well, the land just changed hands a lot. Put it that way. Let's see. All right, I think we have just enough time for y'all. Well, do we have enough time to finish these questions? Actually, I'm just gonna have you guys sign in for your points today because I feel like we don't quite have enough time. So we'll work on these questions next time. But I'll just put a sign-up sheet over here. Don't wanna make sure you have enough time. Make sure you put your full name over here, full name, and we'll work on questions next time.
Oh, yeah.
So, have you ever gone to any of Minnesota's There's a lot of them, but there's not a lot. Okay.
Okay.
So,
You want me to?
Of course, now I.
trying to find one
Anyways,
that